May I speak in the name of our loving, liberating, and life-giving God. Amen. Please be seated. The kingdom of heaven is like a guy moving his office who went out early in the morning to hire some laborers lined up outside of Home Depot. Agreeing with them on a daily wage, he took them to his C-suite and let them get to work. After grabbing a coffee from Pete's, he stopped by the farmer's market and saw some others standing around. He offered them a job too and promised to do right by them in payment. So they went. When he stopped by Rancho Shopping Center for lunch, he did the same. And again when he picked up his dry cleaning early in the afternoon. Out for his evening run, he stumbled on some others and offered them a job too. Finally, as the sun was setting, 2 U-Hauls stuffed with his boxes, but the job not yet done, the man asked his executive assistant to pay the workers, beginning with the last hired. They stepped forward, and she handed them a crisp $10 bill, per her boss's email from a few days before. She then proceeded to give everyone $10 as they stepped forward. And when those who were hired first finally got paid, they were not happy campers. These people worked only 1 hour, they said to the owner, and you have made them equal to us, even though we packed and lifted and sweated for you all day long. But the owner pointed out that when he hired them, he had only promised $10. Am I not allowed to spend my money as I see fit, he asked, or are you envious because I am generous with what is mine? So the last will be first, and the first will be last. I'm not entirely comfortable imagining God as a guy who needs help moving his office. But if I really think about it, I'm not sure why I'm any more comfortable thinking of God as a landowner, a father, the master of slaves, if not for the sheer number of biblical parables in which God is described as such. But for those hearing today's parable from the lips of Jesus, the vineyard imagery was probably as disarmingly familiar as moving is for us today. It's so ordinary, and hearing it this way makes it easier for us to notice certain details. Like, how big is this guy's office that he needs so many people to help him move, and they still aren't done at the end of a day? Why doesn't he just hire everyone he needs in the morning? And what's up with God not paying minimum wage? It's easy to feel that the owner's pay scale is unfair. After all, everything in our meritocratic culture teaches us to side with the workers in their righteous indignation. They did more work. They spent more time. They earned it, after all. But the earlier laborers never complained that they were not fairly compensated. Instead, they are upset that the owner is making those who worked less equal to us. The parable is, in part, about God's indiscriminate grace and goodness, a gift, a payment, a reward that is not contingent on how much or how hard each person works or how well they perform. This is supposed to be good news, though I imagine I'm not alone in finding the story at least a little troubling. But if we find ourselves wondering if God has not studied up on incentivizing his workforce, perhaps skipped the course on Capitalism 101 and the nature of human motivation, well then, we are seriously missing the point. Early Christians read this parable allegorically, seeing the vineyard as the world. There were 2 main ways to understand the laborers. First, as the prophets called to different ages. Think Moses in the beginning, and Isaiah, Ezekiel, and Jeremiah finding their way to the field a little later. The other interpretation saw the early laborers as the disciples of Jesus himself, and those who came later, the converts to the faith. Whether the vineyard represents the church, society, or an individual's inner landscape, all in need of toiling and tilling, planting and harvesting if they are ever to bear fruit, the parable only makes sense if we see working as preferable to not working. That is, the metaphor of the day laborers is effective precisely because they are poor, and they really and truly need the usual wage, even if that's only barely enough to buy one's daily bread, as it would have been in the ancient world. It might be easy to imagine ourselves in the role of the owner, zipping about with too much to do, but Jesus' point here is that we are all, every one of us, called into the field. And in God's economy, a living wage does not come down to equal pay for equal work. It doesn't have anything to do with merit. We don't get what we deserve. All we are promised is enough for our daily bread. We get just enough for today, like everyone else. Alan Jones, the former dean of Grace Cathedral and celebrated author, was a frequent guest preacher at my previous parish. He was very fond of this parable and often dropped this comment into his sermons, said in that devastating British accent. "The trouble with God is God has no taste." We get just enough for today, just like everyone else. The truth is, materially, most of us have much more than we need for today. Our cabinets are full to bursting, as are our garages, our closets, our hard drives. But the searing question at the end of the parable, "Are you jealous because I am generous?" reminds us of the places where we aren't at all sure we have enough. Are we envious of another's health, joy, success, marriage, confidence? The recently released film, Brad's Status, follows a father and son as they go on the classic East Coast college tour in the son's junior year of high school. The story explores the inner life of Brad, the father, a middle-aged man who works for a nonprofit and leads a comfortable life in suburban Sacramento, and yet finds himself consumed with jealousy as he peruses his college friends' Facebook pages and Instagram accounts. One is a super successful filmmaker in LA. Another works in the White House and has written a number of popular books. A third sold his tech company when he was 40 and retired to a life of indulgent luxury. Despite Brad's ostensibly doing quite well, he can't seem to help feeling like a failure when he compares himself to his former friends. The writer and director of the film, Mike White, a very successful filmmaker, says he came up with the plot because for years he felt this way, looking at his colleagues' social media pages. Ben Stiller, who plays Brad and has had a prolific movie career, told Mike when he first read the script he completely understood Brad's plight because he'd often felt this way himself. Given the popularity of the film, this sentiment seems to be widespread. We live in a culture that encourages us to compare ourselves to each other, our insides to others' outsides, over and over again. And an economy that is literally built on our finding ourselves lacking, so that in our despondence we might buy a better car, a new wardrobe, move to a bigger home, on and on, all in the name of feeling just a little closer to who we think we are supposed to be. The good news is, God does not work this way. God does not want or need us to feel badly about ourselves because God knows exactly who we are, made in the divine image, filled with the Holy Spirit, blessed with a dignity we could not and need not earn. When we truly know this, know it in our bones, all the trappings and trimmings of worldly success lose their power over us. We are free to enjoy life's pleasures for what they are, relishing a beautiful sunset, a delicious meal, a deep laugh, a challenging conversation as pure gift. Maybe choosing to get another degree because we're passionate about the subject, not because we need one more notch in our belt. Perhaps downgrading and simplifying from time to time, because at some point, enough really is enough. And what's more, we will want all these good things for everyone else. We will willingly go into the vineyard to toil away, to do God's work in the world, and we will rejoice when every single one of our neighbors receives their daily bread. We will rejoice when everyone is made equal to one another. Life is not fair, but God never promised fairness. Instead, God promises enough for our daily bread, enough for today. A few days ago, I was reading a blog post of someone I met about 10 years ago. April grew up in a conservative Christian church and spent her youth trying to be a good girl, doing everything that was asked of her just as expected. She excelled academically and started college early, where she met her husband. She had her first child at 20 and left school to take care of him. A second son swiftly followed. April loved her children and was deeply grateful for the beautiful home and comforts her husband provided their family, but she had this nagging sense that something was missing. Nevertheless, with all the play dates to schedule and Sunday school classes to teach and sports teams to juggle, she didn't pay her emotional life much mind and kept doing what others expected of her. As her oldest entered kindergarten, April found herself pregnant with baby number 3 and was not so secretly delighted to learn that a girl was on the way. And then one day in her 3rd trimester, she didn't feel well, and by nightfall, she had lost the baby to stillbirth. April was bereft. She had given everything to her family, and in this way, as she understood it, she had given her life to God. She had done everything that was asked of her. She had been a good person. She railed at the universe. She railed at herself. She railed at God. It wasn't fair. Her baby deserved a life. She deserved to watch her daughter grow. Though she didn't notice it then, this marked the beginning of a downward spiral that ultimately led to a very serious addiction to prescription medications. April finally got herself into treatment a few months ago and has been generously sharing her experience, strength, and hope online. Last week, she reflected on this whole matter of fairness. She acknowledged all the grief, disappointment, and fear she experienced those years ago, saying that she became so consumed by what she had lost that she could not see the joy, hope, light, and love that also surrounded her. Recovery for her has involved letting go of the idea that life is supposed to be fair, and instead shifting her perspective, praying for acceptance, learning to forgive herself and those who disappointed her, asking for help, surrendering, and finally making some room for herself in her life. In doing this, she's also come to realize that the second chances, unconditional love, and divine grace that she's received and we all receive all the time are also not fair. They come unbidden when we least expect them, most need them, couldn't possibly earn them. This is the good news of today's parable. Jesus doesn't come with the good news we expect or think we want. He comes with the truth that life isn't fair, but God is with us in it all. We can depend on God, and God promises enough for today. Somehow, may this be enough. Amen.